We can start.
Okay, thank you for the go-ahead. A warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today from all over Asia and Europe for the launch of the Asia-Europe Science and Technology Diplomacy Report, mapping science and technology diplomacy strategies and actions across the two regions. My name is Reika Toja. I'm the director at the Education Department here at the Asia-Europe Foundation, or ASEF in short, as we call it, and I'm honored to be hosting this meeting today. I'm sure most of you are already very familiar with ASEF and what we do here, but for those of you who might be hearing about us for the first time, let me just say as an introduction that we are an intergovernmental organization created in 1997 with the mission to organize platforms and exchanges to facilitate dialogue between Asia and Europe, dialogue among experts, academics, policymakers, thought leaders, and of course, young people. So we want to thank you for all of you for joining us. I see a diverse group here logging in, a mix of young leaders who also include the ones we worked on this report with. So thank you so much for joining, and other stakeholders that we engaged with throughout this report creation process and research. And I also see some new faces. So thank you so much. Welcome to all of you to this session. So at this point, let me show you the quick agenda for today. We prepared with a 90-minute long session. We will begin with hearing from welcome messages from ASEF's Deputy Executive Director and ASEF's Governor for the Philippines. And this will be followed by an introduction to the report and presentation of the key findings from our colleague, Ms. Rina Regner. And then we will welcome our distinguished guests for a panel discussion to unfold some findings of the report and also to add on to it. There will be also a Q&A session as part of this panel discussion. So you will have the opportunity to share your thoughts and ask your questions through the Q&A function in your Zoom. So feel free to use that, even perhaps already while we are presenting the findings. And then we will try our best to reply to them either live or in writing. Also, feel free to use the transcript function. There will be a diversity of English accents in this session, so that might be helpful. So further ado, let's get started, and let me invite Mr. Zhang Lei, ASEF's Deputy Executive Director, to give his warm welcome remarks. Mr. Zhang, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everyone joining us from Europe, and good afternoon to everyone in Asia. It is my great honor to welcome you all to the launch of the Asia-Europe Science and Technology Diplomacy Report, mapping science and technology diplomacy strategies and actions in the two regions. A report that represents a remarkable collaborative effort, bringing together insights from across 41 Asia-Europe Foundation member countries to map the current landscape of science and technology diplomacy both in Asia and Europe. Science and technology diplomacy has emerged as a vital tool for fostering international cooperation, addressing global challenges and advancing sustainable development. Recognizing this growing importance, ASEF launched the Asia-Europe Science and Technology Diplomacy Initiative for Young Leaders last year, with the aim to deepen mutual understanding of strategies, tools, and institutions across our two regions while unlocking new opportunities for collaboration. The report we are launching today marks the first milestone of this initiative and was made possible by the great contributions of young academics, students, diplomats, and professionals who acted as country informants and authored 41 national country reports, which is the intellectual foundation of this publication. We express our gratitude to them and to all stakeholders who contributed with their time and expertise, which helped make this project a reality. Furthermore, I commend ASEF's Education Department for the great coordination of this new project. Thank you also to the European Union and Denmark, whose financial contribution made this report possible. While this report celebrates the achievements of ASEF member countries in advancing science and technology diplomacy, it also acknowledges the challenges that remain. Aligned with ASEF's mission to strengthen dialogue and cooperation, this report is intended as a valuable resource for policymakers, diplomats, researchers, educators, and industry leaders navigating the evolving landscape of global science diplomacy. We hope that this report will spark deeper discussions on cooperation at the intersection of science, technology, innovation, and diplomacy between Asia and Europe, and will inspire its readers to embrace science and technology diplomacy as a cornerstone of international cooperation during these uncertain times. I look forward to an insightful launch event and to hearing the inputs from our distinguished guests later during the panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhang, for the warm welcome. Next, I'm glad to introduce Ambassador Medardo Mazaraig. He's the governor for the Philippines for ASEF and also the ambassador of the Philippines to Singapore. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador. We look forward to your opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Mr. Zhang, our Deputy Executive Director, and best regards to our Executive Director, Ambassador Beata, and the other governors of ASEF, distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, educators, experts, participants from across Asia and Europe. Good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, wherever you are in this world. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of the Asia-Europe Science and Technology Diplomacy Report. Thank you for joining us across time zones for this timely and important conversation. We gather together in a moment marked by deep global uncertainty, with trade tensions dominating the headlines. But beneath this surface, quiet and enduring forms of cooperation are at work, none more vital than science and technology diplomacy. In these uncertain times, soft diplomacy is not a luxury, rather, it is a necessity. And science and technology offer perhaps one of the most promising platforms for such diplomacy. It speaks a common language, one that transcends political and ideological divides, whether it is through collaborative research, shared innovation goals, or evidence-based policy dialogue. Science and technology collaboration and partnerships build bridges where the other channels may falter. Asia and Europe together hold immense scientific, technological, and intellectual capital. But more importantly, we share a responsibility to channel that capital into inclusive, cooperative, and sustainable futures. Today's presentation and discussion of the Asia-Europe Science and Technology Diplomacy Report does more than outline trends. It proposes a roadmap for a more connected, resilient, and science-informed global order. It is on this premise that the Philippines, through the leadership of our Department of Science and Technology, or DOST, strategically aligns its national science and technology priorities with international diplomacy efforts in Asia and Europe through various frameworks and mechanisms. On this note, allow me to touch on the overarching strategy for the Philippine science and technology aspiration, one that is embedded in a foresight document that underscores the significance of science and technology advancements for economic success, called the Pagtanaw 2050, or Looking Ahead to 2050. The Pagtanaw 2050 identifies the four fundamental pillars that guide the formulation of core national science and technology objectives: human well-being, wealth creation, wealth protection, and sustainability. These pillars primarily center on enhancing economic competitiveness amid global challenges through intersectoral collaboration in research and development. Its priority areas include agricultural sciences, climate change, disaster risk resilience, health sciences, and of course, digital technology. The Philippines experiences an archipelagic nation located in a disaster-prone region of the world in the cusp of a digital revolution that is rapidly reshaping how we live, has valuable insights to share, and even more to learn from the global community in these priority areas. As such, the national science and technology priorities significantly inform the Philippines' international diplomacy efforts. We continue to foster knowledge and technology exchange and capacity building with international partners through various DOST initiatives such as joint conferences, joint research, publications, and the Balik Scientist Exchange Program. This strategic approach aims to tap and contribute into global expertise and resources to advance innovation and address scientific challenges both locally and worldwide. On the multilateral front, the Philippines actively participates in regional bodies like the ASEAN Permanent Committee on Science and Technology and the ASEAN Committee on Science, Technology, and Innovation. These platforms facilitate knowledge exchange and resource sharing within the ASEAN region, as well as with other Asian nations. DOST likewise collaborates with international organizations such as the UNESCO, with SDG key indicators used to measure sectoral growth. The Philippines leverages these key international affiliations to provide an opportunity to share science diplomacy programs and elicit collaboration with interested foreign counterparts. In recognition of the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence and its transformative potential across industries, the DOST in particular introduced AI research initiatives in agriculture, health, and education. It is actively working with the global community in establishing mechanisms for AI responsible development, deployment, and governance. DOST's partnerships and dialogues with key government agencies, particularly the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Trade and Industry, and the Foreign Service Institute, ensure that our diplomats tasked with advancing the country's economic agenda are well-informed and trained on their science and technology responsibilities, including international scientific cooperation in AI. This afternoon's discussion is an invaluable contribution to this effort. It captures the current landscape of science and technology collaboration between Asia and Europe, identifying areas of opportunity, urgency, and shared interest. It equips us, policymakers, institutions, and practitioners with insights which we can use to craft policies for our domestic initiatives and strategic international partnerships. In closing, I want to extend my deepest thanks to all our partners, contributors, and speakers, especially those who will join our panel shortly to share insights from across sectors and continents. Your dedication to open dialogue is what makes this initiative not just powerful, but extremely powerful. As we reflect on the findings of this report and look ahead, let us reaffirm our shared commitment to collaboration over competition, to openness over isolation, and to diplomacy that empowers solutions grounded in knowledge, trust, and mutual respect. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussions ahead.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those welcoming words and opening remarks. Philippines is also one of the countries featured in the report, and thanks for sharing more of the approach of the country to science and technology diplomacy. It was also very interesting to see the Pacta Now 2050 document, the big visionary one that guides science and technology diplomacy. But let us set the stage for the comparative report and learn more about the findings. I would like to welcome Ms. Lina Regner, a project executive here at the Education Department, who will share the background of this work and present the key findings of the report to you. Lina, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rika, for that introduction, and allow me to say welcome and hello to everyone who's joining us from Asia and Europe to listen into our findings of this report. It's my great honor to be the one from our department to present the findings here today, and I hope that you find it insightful as we did as we were doing the research and compiling the data as well. But before I go into the findings themselves, allow me to set the stage a bit and explain a bit about the background and how this report came to be. So in a society where technology is being further and further interpreted and integrated into our everyday lives, science and technology diplomacy is also on its underhand being recognized in its role for addressing global challenges, fostering international cooperation, and also driving innovation-led economic growth. We saw here already in the opening remarks the perspectives from the Philippines, but then we also have from other countries, of course, featured in this report. But in light of these changes that we see in the world, we at the Asia Europe Foundation launched in 2024 an initiative specifically on the topic of science and technology diplomacy. And we wanted here to be able to contribute with different aspects of Asia-Europe cooperation. So looking at three main objectives, we wanted to provide this platform to facilitate knowledge exchange between Asia and Europe, between countries in the two regions, to be able to see where we as an interregional organization, but then with these connections in the two regions, be able to contribute with further understanding on what the current status of science and technology diplomacy is in these two regions, as well as to bring together people from civil society, from governments, from academia, from different walks of life, to build these peer-to-peer networks and be able to exchange in dialogue and promote this cooperation between the two regions. So with 2024 being the first year of this project, we sought to understand the field better and learn from experts in the field, of course, but then also see where we as ASEF could have added value to the field and bring aboard some interesting perspectives. So to achieve this, we launched the research for the Asia-Europe Science and Technology Diplomacy Report, which currently, as it stands, and we're going to share more about it later, maps the existing strategies and actions in Asia and Europe and documents kind of a snapshot of what the current status is. And today, as Mr. Zhang noted in his welcoming remarks, the launch of today's report marks the first milestone of the work that we have done within this project. And we're very excited to be able to share with you the key findings from this learning that we've had in the past year. So the report, as it was structured and as it was framed, aimed to tackle two main questions. So what are the strategies that countries do have in place for science and technology diplomacy, if any, and how are they structured? And how are these strategies then being implemented through actions, tools, initiatives, monitoring mechanisms, etc., to adhere to the strategies? And to help answer these questions, we thought about how we could gain the insights best from our member countries. And we decided to engage individual researchers and appoint them as country informants for this project, where they would come from different varied backgrounds, some of them young academics, diplomats themselves, some of them students, PhD candidates, etc., and other professionals and civil society members who can really do the research in these countries as someone who has that direct contact with the field and can understand it better. And to guide them, we developed a questionnaire, and then this was the framework for which the country informants conducted their desk research and engaged in interviews with key stakeholders in the field, so from government, from businesses, from academia, and different research institutions, to learn more about what the field is like, who is engaged in it, and what are they doing to engage in this topic. And we want to here already highlight the invaluable contributions that these country informants had to, of course, lay the foundation for the findings of this report. And we cannot thank them enough for their time and dedication to this project, and in highlighting showcasing the findings from their specific countries. So besides informing the narrative and the overall comparative analysis, for which I will be presenting the overall findings, they also wrote and authored their own individual country report, which to a further extent expands upon the findings from their country. And these documents will then be published also separately for you to be able to access. But with that background in mind, we're here today to talk about findings, and I think that's what's the most interesting for most of you. But before we do that, I want to preface the findings and set some limitations and things to keep in mind here. So, of course, we always aim with our projects to have a representation from all ASEF member states, but unfortunately, in this case, we do have some countries that are not featured in this report. So we, of course, see this as a contribution to the field and to provide insights, but of course, it's not in that case exhaustive. And with the country informants having these varied backgrounds and expertise, and also research experience, we of course see this as something that can influence the findings and the way that it's presented. So we want you to keep that in mind moving forward as well. And whilst I will go into all of the backgrounds when it comes to science and technology diplomacy and its different iterations, we do recognize that as we're working with so many people from across Asia and Europe, and their different languages and translations of documents may impact how the topic is perceived and discussed in certain areas, and that can also have its own implications for the findings. And then finally, of course, with it being a mapping exercise, we've done our best, and the country informants have done a great job in accessing what is available on publicly open data sources to collect the information available. And they've also, as I mentioned, had these interviews with key stakeholders in the field. But of course, different countries had different availabilities to these sources. So we recognize that there might be more information offered on some countries compared to others. But with that being said, and getting the disclaimers out, I would like to delve into the findings of this report. Starting out with framing under the first question, so what are the strategies that are in place in these countries? We do see that whilst a few countries have a standalone document in this field, examples being here France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, specifically focusing on science and technology diplomacy. Most countries that we have in our report do integrate these objectives in broader policies. For example, broader foreign policy documents, science and innovation to an extent, also when it comes to research and innovation, education, with it being a very multifaceted field. So this kind of sets the scene for the diversity that is in place in science and technology diplomacy across the two regions. And looking into the strategies and its objectives, we see a similar approach in that there are many different ways of utilizing science and technology diplomacy and what the objectives with the strategies are. We asked, though, the country informants to indicate what they see as core objectives in this case. And we do note that the top ones noted in most of the countries with 98.2% are to increase economic competitiveness and to facilitate research cooperation. This is also then followed closely by engaging in soft diplomacy activities with science and technology diplomacy, as well as to, in line with facilitating research cooperation, also then to develop the research and development capacity within their own country. When we look at the regional comparison, which you can see on the screen here, we see that Asian countries that we have in the report tend to adopt a more broad approach and multifaceted approach to their objectives compared to Europe, where we report an average of 6 different core objectives compared to Europe's 5. And when we look at specific individual objectives, we see the biggest gaps in access to infrastructure, where 75% of Asian countries highlight this as a priority compared to the lesser 32% in Europe. We see that these findings underline this broader scope of objectives guiding science and technology diplomacy strategies. And this suggests also that there are diverse opportunities for collaboration between different regions and how they overlap also in certain instances. And then when it comes to the utilization, again, of science and technology diplomacy, we see that it also differs a bit in terms of perspective from Asia and Europe. We have here used the framework developed by the Royal Society and AAAS, proposed in 2010. We're aware that they just about a month ago proposed a new framework with 2 definitions in this case, but based on the structure that we have in place for this, we see that European countries are more likely to report an objective or a strategy that is in line with diplomacy for science compared to Asian perspective, or let's say the description where science for diplomacy is more leading. And this we see aligns also with the objectives mentioned in the previous slide. Looking then at specific scientific fields and areas, we see also here that the top ones reported is related to natural sciences, followed then by engineering and technology, as well as medical and health sciences. Humanities here is listed as the least prioritized field, which we note as an kind of an interesting finding, as we saw that the discussions currently is, of course, the global challenges and the need for mutual understanding and need for these sorts of topics to be discussed. And we see that this underscores then the gap between what is kind of the public discourse and then what could be the actual approaches. Looking into then what the opportunities for collaboration is between the 2 regions, we see that there is an interest in specifically, to cooperate between the regions. Europe has an interest in cooperation with Asia, and Asia has an interest in cooperation with Europe. When we look at this then in terms of the fields that could be of interest here, looking into natural sciences and engineering technology, we see here that specifically topics such as artificial intelligence, climate change, digital transformation, and space sciences are hot topics currently, and that this could be then brought forward into collaborative spaces around digital transformation, climate action, and global health. Looking then into the stakeholders, as I mentioned, the country informants engaged with the discussions with different stakeholders in the field, but also did their own research. And we see here that based on the perception of the country informants, the governmental and research and academic stakeholders are the ones that are driving, or essentially driving, in the science and technology diplomacy field in the individual countries. We see in Europe, where, as I mentioned, diplomacy for science is the category that most relates to the findings of the country informants, that research and academic stakeholders are a bit more involved, or seen as involved in this field compared to Asia. As we look at the industry stakeholders compared to the 2 most frequent ones, it's perceived as a lower engagement, and even lower so from civil society stakeholders, where they are reported to only play a marginally or somewhat active role in driving these efforts in the country. Looking at the specific actions that are taken then by these different stakeholders, we see that the top ones noted are related to bilateral and multilateral cooperation agreements, as well as regional research funding schemes, again, aligning to the main objectives of developing research capacity, for example. And this underscores, of course, the importance of both formal collaboration frameworks, but also then the financial support needed to sustain these research instruments. Here we see that also around 2/3 of the countries report that they have science and technology advisors attached to embassies, and we'll go into that a bit more later. But they also offer fellowships or internships specifically in this field, which is also a great opportunity for those that are emerging and wish to learn more about the field to engage with it. And then to categorize these actions and tools further, we utilize the framework proposed by Gluckman and others in the reports, which are noted to actions designed to directly advance countries' national needs, to design, to address cross-border interests, and to meet global needs and challenges. And what we see here is that they also focus mainly on regional objectives first. So national interests here are meeting domestic goals. And this is prioritized before a country engages in broader regional or international cooperation, where most actions that were asked to be categorized fall into the first category, and then we have a decreasing number of actions being noted in the subsequent categories. Then mentioning the personnel, we also see here a very different approach, or let's say engagement of people in the field, where some countries note that they have no specific attachés or counselors devoted to science and technology diplomacy. And I want to emphasize here that it's specifically, let's say, in the title, in the job description. Of course, we see here even in the findings that there are variations of constellations of tasks between different personnel. But when it comes to personnel specifically dedicated to the field, most countries do not note that they have such an attaché or personnel in foreign missions, whilst we also have a few countries that note then large number of representations of these types of personnel abroad. So this showcases both the kind of differences between countries, but we also note here that, of course, different size of countries as well as access to resources can, of course, impact the personnel engaged. And to then coordinate and monitor both the actions and the personnel that are involved here, we looked into, first of all, if there is such a coordination effort, how it is, if it's on a regular basis or more on an ad hoc basis, but then also if the countries are engaging in these sorts of coordination mechanisms in an international level. And we do see that most countries have some sort of coordination efforts, be it on a regular or ad hoc basis. But the question of who is the one responsible for this coordination efforts vary, where only a few countries have a specific ministry responsible for this, whilst most countries support cross-sectoral partnerships and cross-ministry partnerships between ministries such as the ones responsible for foreign and international affairs, but also those involved in education, science and technology specifically, but also ministries related to commerce and trade and economy. So when we look at all of these findings together, we see, of course, that it offers an insight into the current status, but with the note that the field is ever changing and rapidly evolving, even as we were conducting the research. As mentioned, new frameworks were proposed and new suggestions on how to categorize science diplomacy were brought forward. Discussions are being held in international organizations, most recently also with a meeting in Paris for UNESCO as well. So whilst we hope that this report can offer a snapshot of the status as we see it, we also hope that it can spur dialogue and questions for further research and discussions. As with ASEF's goal to bring together people to share perspectives and engage in dialogue, we hope that the dialogue following this in the panel discussion will spur and works as the springboard for the points coming across. So with that being said, we are very excited to share with you the report. And I would like to offer the floor back to Reka at this point. But before then, of course, we would like to give you the opportunity to yourself to share the insights with the comparative being ready for your perusal. Of course, I encourage you to stay on to this session and listen to the discussions and then take your time and read the full report at a later stage. But with that, I hand the floor back to Reka, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Linnea, for walking us through of the key findings. In this report, we deliberately took the approach of just collecting information and data and offering to you to identify gaps and points of interest and points for further discussions. And I already see a good question in the chat, in the Q&A, which already identified such a gap. And Arifa is asking from Tech for Good Institute, what might be the reason for this finding? So I invite all of you to jump in and share your knowledge in the chat, where we are jumping on a panel discussion over here. And also, if time allows, we might answer this question live too. So let me invite to join me on this virtual stage our dear panelists, Professor Zakri Abdul Hamid. Many of you might be familiar with his name because he's one of Malaysia's most distinguished science diplomats and sustainability advocates. Currently, he's serving as the director, founding director of the International Institute of Science, Diplomacy and Sustainability at UCSI University in Malaysia. But earlier, he also served as science advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia and was also a member of the UN Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Next, let me invite to the stage Dr. Jan Marco Müller, who is the team leader on Global Approach, Multilateral Dialogue and Science Diplomacy at DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission. He's originally a geographer, but since 2020, he's working with the European Commission and he's the coordinator for the science diplomacy and multilateral relations. And also, he's the newly appointed chairman of the Foreign Ministry's Science and Technology Advice Network. So congratulations, Jan, and thank you for joining us. And then next, let me invite Miss Emi Kaneko to join us on this virtual stage. She's the director of the Japan Science and Technology Agency Singapore office. And in this capacity, she's running excellent and innovative research programs here from Singapore to connect the global researcher community, but especially her office is serving as a gateway to connect Southeast Asia and South Asia to Japan's universities, research institutes, and companies, and vice versa. And last but not least, let me invite Ms. Dovile Galite-Janusone. She's the former Science and Innovation Advisor at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. For more than 17 years, she's also been an academic as a professor at the Institute of International and EU Law at Mykolas Romeris University. And she's also currently an advisor at the Ministry of Justice in Lithuania. So thank you so much, for our panelists, for joining us. We will run this discussion based on a couple of questions that I would like to ask you first, but the chat will remain open for our attendees to post their questions as well that we can incorporate into the discussion. But first, let me start with a question to Jan Marco Müller, because you have also yourself done a lot of mapping work, and the most recent piece of your great works is the European Framework for Science Diplomacy. You have a vast knowledge of what's happening in Europe and beyond. And our report is looking at two regions, Europe and Asia. So I would like to ask you to point out a couple of findings that you found the most interesting, that stood out for you from this mapping exercise.
Okay, thank you very much, Rika. And let me first just say on behalf of the European Commission, thank you for the efforts of pulling together this report, which is an immense kind of valuable resource, both for informing science and technology diplomacy in Europe and in Asia. So that's very welcome. And I also welcome, of course, that the involvement of young scientists and young diplomats in the production of this report, because at the end of the day, they are the future of science diplomacy. And I think it comes at a very timely moment. And we are facing at the moment, tectonic shifts, both in terms of geopolitics, but also in terms of science and technology. And that actually puts science, technology, and innovation into the spotlight. So that's also one of the reasons why we have decided on the European Union side to develop a European framework for science diplomacy. And you know, we had set up working groups to this, putting together the scientists and diplomats to develop recommendations. And our report was just published a few weeks ago. This is actually, in a way, very interesting to compare actually your report with our report, as they were kind of developed in parallel. And I see actually many kind of similar also conclusions in both reports. Perhaps let me start first with your first kind of conclusion, your first finding, which is that actually few countries have standalone documents on science diplomacy. I think it's correct. There are a couple of countries that have them. Some are developing them. And I know on the European side, actually, some member states have been waiting for our European report before they embark on a national strategy. But I think this is a bit of a reflection of one phenomenon which we've seen in past years, and it's a mushrooming of diplomacies, water diplomacy, climate diplomacy, ocean diplomacy, space diplomacy, you name it. And I sometimes have the impression that, in diplomatic services, they tend to believe, science diplomacy is yet another one of those diplomacies. And the point I'm making is that actually science diplomacy cuts across all of them, because there's no ocean diplomacy without science. There's no climate diplomacy without science. And that perhaps harms a little bit the visibility of science diplomacy as compared to the other diplomacies. But I think this is changing, and I think more and more foreign ministries are actually strengthening their scientific and technological capabilities to cater for this. The second conclusion I found very interesting in your report, which actually very much mirrors also our report, is that countries put first competitiveness as the key objective, and then second cooperation research. And that's of course a kind of inherent conflict in a way, competitiveness versus competition versus cooperation. And of course, I mean, science diplomacy is not about being nice to each other. Science diplomacy is of course about achieving foreign policy goals. And in times where we see this tech race between nations, I think it's quite obvious that this competition aspect comes very much out on the top. But I think the one thing science diplomacy actually can bring here to the table is actually science is the voice for the global goods and commons, because we have these big global challenges we are facing. And I think it's very important actually to remind policymakers and diplomats, yes, of course, they are national interests, but there are also these common interests in terms of, transboundary river basins, for instance, or of course, climate change as a global issue. So I think this very much kind of mirrors our report as well. And I think very much in line with this is also your finding that, of course, there's a focus on engineering and technology and natural sciences, and actually very few mention social science as being a priority in that context. And I think it's very important, I think, to remind everybody of the importance of social sciences and humanities in this context. And I give you a practical example. Take the Mekong River Basin in Southeast Asia. Of course, like any transboundary river basins, you have conflicts between countries in that basin. But you cannot solve these conflicts just with hydrologists alone, because quite simply, the Mekong has a different meaning for the soul of the nation in Cambodia or Laos as compared to China, where it is yet just another river. And I think these social science, humanities dimension, cultural dimension is a very important one in this context. One other interesting finding in your report is the issue of stakeholder dynamics. And in fact, we see an emerging kind of importance of these non-stakeholders. They still are kind of appear a little bit, at the bottom of the list in your ranking. When you think of business, when you think of civil society organizations, but actually they are becoming increasingly important in this world of tech competition, which we are seeing. And I think it's important to recognize also that science diplomacy itself is changing there. Science diplomacy has become much more equitable in terms of North versus South. The Southern dimension, I mean, the countries from the South demand rightly their seat at the table, and they're increasingly seeing science diplomacy as a means to leverage their geopolitical influence. But science diplomacy, it has also become younger. It has become much more female. It has become much more diverse in recent years. And I think this is very good if you want to come to common solutions. And perhaps the last issue I want to raise is you mentioned the issue of, resources being devoted to science diplomacy. And you mentioned, you showed this graph with the attaches. I would have some questions about this graph because, of course, in many ways, many attaches also have other roles, and then they perhaps not reflected. And of course, this science, technology, innovation, digital space is always a bit difficult to define in a hard way. Actually, our finding is that we have European embassies have several hundreds of science, tech, innovation, digital attaches. And I think the key issue is here, how can we find synergies between them? How to become more strategic actually in using those resources which we have and deploy them for science diplomacy. And I think if we do that on both sides in Europe and in Asia, then actually we have this critical mass also to engage with each other. Because I think the problems we are facing, they are so huge and they affect all of us. And despite the competition, which is of course very normal between our countries, there's a need to have this dialogue going. And I think your report is a perfect basis for such a dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for kicking off the conversation with these points on mushrooming diplomacies, but science cuts across all of them. Most importantly, competition versus collaboration, very important point, and the stakeholders. Yeah, it's a very good way to define them as non-stake stakeholders whose role are changing and evolving in this scene. And the issue of social sciences. So perhaps let us address, let me invite Professor Zachary to comment on your second point on competition and collaboration, because we saw in this report that according to our country informant, the top priority is for countries to use science and technology diplomacies to increase economic competitiveness, but at the same time tackling global societal challenges is also high on the priority. So how can one marry these two seemingly opposing objectives? Oh, Professor, unmute yourself, please. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having me and also posing that question to me. I think in particular for us in the global south, the issue of balance between on one hand to protect, say, the environmental resources, and the other one is on the need for socio-economic development. Secondly, Chair, I think at the outset, we must reflect on exactly what is the purpose of science diplomacy or science advice. I think at the outset, our ultimate target is the policymakers or the political leaders, because these are the guys who would develop, create policies, programs, or projects. Yeah, so they need to be advised by the expert, by the scientists. So for them, from my own personal experience, the socio-economic development is very much a top priority. And that means increasing the well-being of the citizens of a country. And secondly, whether the advice that we give eventually translate into creation of jobs. Yeah, jobs. So again, there's the balance between the need to conserve the environment and the other one on the socio-economic development. This is one issue which has been at the back of everyone's mind when we go for negotiation. Normally, the negotiation, say on climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, eventually, as Jan would also agree, eventually it gravitates into the north-south conflict. I think when we say about urgency, is how do you diffuse this north-south conflict and eventually how we can talk as collaborators, as partners. Yeah. In other words, you need to level the playing field. That is very important. And for that, I think one of the shortcomings of people in the global south is the capacity, the lack of knowledge, the lack of knowledge, in particular, even on negotiation. There's an art and a science. And I agree again with Jan by when he says, of course, the engineering, the natural sciences are important. Eventually, is a social science that is most needed because, Chair, I think eventually what we need to have right off the bat is a change of mindset. Okay, is a change of mindset, and maybe I should stop for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for giving insights on these objectives of science and technology diplomacy, finding the balance between environment and socio-economic development and North-South conflict, which we'll be coming back to. But before we do that, let me invite Emmy to contribute as well. In our report, we saw that one of the other most common objectives of countries, of course, to develop their capacities for research and international collaboration. And we know Japan is widely recognized for its excellent programs in doing that. So we would like to ask you to share with us how Japan builds such collaborations, how the country benefits from it, and what are some lessons learned or pitfalls to avoid.
Thank you, Rika. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you in Europe. In case you're not familiar with my agency, JST is a Japanese funding agency, meaning that our biggest mandate is to allocate research fund to research performers in Japan, such as universities and research institutes, so that they can pursue their research, come up with great outcomes, and utilize them for the betterment of the society. Our mandate here in this region is to connect Japanese researchers with their counterpart in this region and offer them funding opportunities. I believe this activity can be recognized as the implementation of science and technology diplomacy, as our activities are closely connected with diplomatic platforms and facilitations. So I'm happy to share my experiences and insight as a practitioner today with you. Then if I may go back to Reka's question, like I said, JST is a funder of research money. And in this capacity as a funder, JST has initiated or participated in numerous research programs as the implementation of science and technology diplomacy, such as Concert Japan, Algo, Baymont Forum, Aspire, eAsia, you name it. But for this question, I'd like to elaborate on two programs, SATRIPS and Nexus. So the first one, Science and Technology Research Partnership for Sustainable Development, or SATRIPS, was initiated in 2008 by JST and another Japanese government agency, Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA. as a tool to promote research cooperation between Japan and recipient countries of official development assistance, including those in Asia and Europe. The program scheme is that Japanese researchers and their counterpart in ODA recipient countries write up a joint research proposal and apply to JST's call for proposals, as well as request ODA technical assistance to JICA. If your proposal is selected for support, the Japanese component will be supported by JST, and the counterpart, excuse me, the counterpart component will be supported by JICA. So official development assistance, or ODA, is clearly a tool for diplomacy. So within the program scheme of SATRIPS, it's tied up with research cooperation. Therefore, I think I can say that spirit of science and technology diplomacy is well embodied by SATRIPS. So another program I'd like to introduce is called Networked Exchange, United Strength for Stronger Partnerships between Japan and ASEAN, or Nexus. This program was initiated in 2023 in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of friendship and cooperation between Japan and ASEAN. So this program is directly connected with diplomacy and can be utilized to enhance joint researchers or students' mobility and human capacity development in Japan and ASEAN. Nexus is still a new program, so we need to wait and see how outcomes will be generated. But SATRIPS is already 17 years old, so and I've seen a lot of outcomes coming from this program, such as one kind of like bioenergy, which has been authorized for use in Thailand, or numerous number of researchers or students studying in Japan or being trained in Japan. As for pitfalls, I've seen several cases where research proposals we selected for support under SATRIPS had to be eventually cancelled because research institutes from Japan and the counterpart country couldn't agree on terms of references or research agreement after one year of trying to do so. So the project just couldn't get started, I don't exactly know why this happened, but I just wish there had been some room for compromise between the two, parties involved before the project got canceled. So this is a kind of, difficulty when it comes to the implementation part of diplomacy. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Emmy. Japan is doing such a great work of building its own research capacity, but also contributing to the global goals and sustainability at the same time, and working with ODA countries. Let me invite also Dovia to take the floor. So we discussed national strategies and their objectives, and how difficult it is really to define what is science diplomacy. It sits in the intersection of many other policies, but still some countries have standalone strategies, and we heard that might be more are coming now that the EU framework is out. So please share with us, based on your practitioner experience, how does a country formulate such a strategy?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and congratulations on the report. It's really great to have the comparative perspective from regions, because me as former advisor, I'm more focused on the European approach. So it's great to see the comparative approach as well. Lithuania is not the success story on this part. So for the moment, we still do not have the standalone strategy. And what I can share from my experience as the Science and Innovation Advisor, that the challenges, one of the challenges which can also be transferred to opportunity as well, so is the lack in collaboration. As you mentioned that we have here different perspectives or different aspects which have to be united. And the issue is that these aspects of these fields are dealt by different ministries, as it was already mentioned by Gianmarco. So the ministerial level or the ministries between themselves not always are in collaboration, or sometimes not even in good terms in communication. So in my opinion, it is important to have the collaboration, communication, coordination, but as well the leadership. Because if we have, for this strategy to be put in place, there is a need for collaboration between different ministries. But there still needs to be a leader, because without the leadership, it's hardly possible to have the document as standalone to be prepared. And as my experience, for this, I would say that Lithuania is the success story, because almost 2 years ago, we have created the network of science and innovation advisors in each ministry of Lithuania. So in total, 14 advisors plus 1 advisor at the government. And this network showed us the strength, how advisors between themselves in communicating can put in touch or put in collaboration the ministries themselves. So I think that one way how to deal with this or to prepare these strategies could be some kind of network of advisors, which would help, to put in place the ministries, to force people from the ministries to sit in one place and to discuss those issues. But as I said, it is also important the leadership to be there. And from the ministerial collaboration, but on the other hand, the intersectoral collaboration is needed, that not only the public or governmental sector, but also private sector, the academics. And here is also the aspect related to what was pointed out already by Gianmarco about your report about the special attachés. So here we have this aspect which we hear a lot, the gap between diplomats and academics. Or that we speak different languages, and we need kind of the interpreters or mediators. So again, I could say that the advisors, science and innovation advisors of the network of advisors could work on this to help, to translate the languages and help to communicate, to help for the communication. So on one hand, the lack of collaboration between ministries and intersectoral cooperation is a challenge, but on the other hand, to overcome it, it could become the opportunity to have expertise in different fields, which is the essential aspect for science diplomacy.
Thank you so
Of course, there are plenty other challenges, but I just wanted to highlight this aspect from my own experience.
That's amazing. Very important points. Leadership is, of course, important, and perhaps starting small steps, having a network of advisors who can initiate a change of culture, change of mindset would work well, which we see happening. Your country is a perfect example of it, with freshly setting this up. So let's go to the next set of questions or discussion points, which is really about Asia-Europe collaboration. So how can we incentivize more collaboration between Asia and Europe along science and technology diplomacy? And perhaps let's bring in also in this discussion the point from Professor Zakri. How do we solve the North-South conflict? Is it a conflict, or what is the role for Asia and Europe? How can they overcome this? And also the first question from the chat, the question of infrastructure, the differences in priorities in Asia and Europe, and is this something where Asia and Europe could collaborate better together to share infrastructure? So your thoughts on collaboration opportunities, please. No particular order. Anyone who would like to go first, please do. Jan.
Yes, now I think the key issue is we need to create the spaces where scientists and diplomats from actually both sides can meet, and in so doing, actually, we need to learn from each other, because science diplomacy is a quickly evolving field, and we don't have the answers to everything. We are faced with kind of challenges for which textbook knowledge will not help us. We need to develop new solutions through cooperation of scientists and diplomats. And bringing the two camps together isn't easy. I mean, I always joke that scientists and diplomats don't even agree on what Europe is. So it's really an issue that transcends borders, that transcends mindsets, that transcends languages actually also, because we are all faced in both continents with a diversity of languages. And of course, science is English is the lingua franca of science, and French is the lingua franca of diplomacy. But of course, we have also all our national languages coming in. But when we want to deal, I mean, with global challenges or transboundary problems, we need to apply them to real world problems. Because that's what the diplomats are always saying. You know, what is in it for me? What's the pragmatic solution that will help us? And I think that's why it is important that we think of, for instance, joint workshops or around specific problems, which we could do together, be it desertification in Central Asia, be it river basin conflicts, whatever it may be. We're also thinking of organizing a virtual dialogue between Europe and Asia together with you, where we could kind of bring the different views to the table. And then, of course, I mean, in Europe, we have, of course, Horizon Europe as our research framework program in place, is one of our most important tools for science diplomacy, which is open to the world, and which we also want to put particular emphasis also in coming years on the ASEAN countries, for instance. And of course, you know, we have South Korea has joined as an associated country. Horizon Europe, we are in talks with Japan, with Singapore, also discussed it with India recently. And I'm actually glad to see our science counselor in Singapore, Benoit Savaroche, being on this call. And he's, of course, the experts on you know, the funding opportunities. So I think we should all use these opportunities and create these spaces where scientists and diplomats from both sides can meet.
Thank you so much. Other ideas? How can Asia and Europe collaborate better? What topic? Professor Zakri.
Yes, I agree with Jan. We need to identify some of these issues. What you're saying about real world problems. Chair, I think what we also need to do at the outright is to garner attention from the public, from the policymakers, from the government officials. So one of the hot button issue between Europe and a number of countries in Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, is the European Union Deforestation Act. I think it has gone into force, but it's still not being implemented. And this affects countries who are exporters of some of the primary products, ranging from oil palm, rubber, cocoa, you know, soybean in Brazil and all that. So these are real problems that science diplomacy can contribute, the so-called track two diplomacy. So we don't involve government officials, but we involve the so-called science diplomats at our level and discuss, in an open, transparent, way, but very constructively. So I would argue that that should be one of the priorities. So in doing that, both sides can enhance our own capability and promote understanding. What is lacking in science diplomacy that science diplomacy could contribute, I think, is to increase the level of mutual understanding. Earlier on, we said the problem is to how do you work on this so-called common interests. So we focus on common interests, not common difficulties. So in that way, we generate a lot of goodwill, and it will be a very good start for what we're trying to do between the two regions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, focusing on common interest and real world problems. You mentioned examples. Would you like to contribute, Emmy or Tobin?
Sure. I'd like to share about an example at GST for collaboration between Asia and Europe under a program named Science Technology Action Nexus for Development, or STAND. This was a trilateral collaboration between JST from Japan, the Department of Science and Technology from the Philippines, and the UK Research Innovation from the UK in the research field of sustainable development in Southeast Asia, with focus on marine science, water treatment, and urban environment. The three parties had numerous discussions before we identified these specific topics, which we later addressed as global challenges, called for research proposals, and jointly funded successful projects. During the discussions, we also organized a very intensive scientific meeting for researchers from the three countries to give us their inputs. Yeah, so that we can put these inputs into consideration. I guess there are multiple lessons that I can share with you from this example. One, we should try to receive inputs from stakeholders from different sectors with regard to what are the global challenges that they feel we need to address. These stakeholders include, in our case, like researchers, the industry, policymakers, funding agencies, but of course we can also try to address, civil society activists and other people. And second, we need to secure the resources to make the collaboration happen. This is very important. And when I say resources, these include like manpower, time, money, whatever. Yeah. And thirdly, I think this point was mentioned by the Filipino ambassador in the opening session as well, but I guess it's important for us to align these international collaborations with national strategies in the countries involved. This is very, very important because in our case, at one point, the UK administration stopped to give like any new money for international development activities, so that it caused the UK research innovations to pull out from our collaboration and leaving huge adverse effects on us. So when a new administration takes over in whichever partner country, it's sometimes difficult to predict what they will come up with, but it would be best if we could prepare ourselves for any changes as much as possible, although I reckon this is a very difficult challenge as well. Thank you.
Thank you for providing examples, actually, how to do this. It was very useful. And Dobir?
So many things have already been said. Maybe just to add what Jan Marco has said about the platforms and Horizon projects, and maybe also reflecting what Emmy has said, that Horizon is open for the world, but still many Asian countries are not involved. So the other type of collaboration could be bilateral or between a smaller number of countries, and at least I know some experiences, and for instance Emmy has told about their programs, and I know that in Lithuania there are several programs specifically with specific countries for research collaborations, and it could be also the kind of small alternative or the initiative to start the collaborations, maybe not in the global way, but starting step by step. And another aspect which was also raised, so we have on one hand a national interest, on the other hand we have a global context, and Emmy just mentioned the importance of a national interest as well. So we do have global context and the importance of it, but countries, we always will be thinking about their national interests as well. And here in both regions, we have a huge diversity, not only between Asia and Europe, but even in the regions themselves. So probably the platforms which were mentioned by Jan Marco could be helpful to identify the on one hand similar challenges, not I'm not talking about only the global challenges, but also through the national interest perspective challenges, and sharing the good and bad practices, because there are issues, similar can be issues with pollution, water pollution, access to water, and so on. So they can be helpful experiences from both sides. So I think it is also like one of aspect of challenges, how to connect and not to forget the national interest and global context, but also sharing bad and good practices from different perspectives.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Noted on these many good ideas how to foster collaboration between Asia and Europe. As we are approaching the end, towards the end of this panel, but we also have very exciting questions in the chat. So maybe let me just pick two of them, and then you can choose which one you go for. One is that how does one become a science and technology diplomat, especially in a third world country? If you could share some good inspiring stories or advice to this question. And another very important one is that we are talking about big picture of science diplomacy here, but actually, how do we bring these global innovations in science technology to the grassroots communities and underprivileged communities? So let's address these two questions in the last round. Professor Zakri first.
Yes, I can speak from experience. So, to be a science diplomat, you don't really have to have a target for that. Sometimes it comes naturally. In my case, trained as a scientist, I was encouraged, invited by the negotiators or the policymakers, government officials, to advise our delegation. And being a scientist, you know the issues, but you don't really know how to negotiate your way. So in my case, it's a journey of nearly 30 years ago. When I was a young man, I was co-opted as a negotiator for my country's delegation, negotiating the Convention on Biological Diversity. As I kept telling this story, at the end of the first day, I want to run away home. I couldn't fit in with diplomats who are really this foreign uh, official from the foreign office who are more adept in having small talks than really the serious thing. But in actual fact, Chair, it's in the small talks where they were doing the dealings. When they come for the plenary, which is very short, that is only to gavel the agreement. So that was 30 years ago. I never look back. Of course, I was learning from experience. Nowadays, I think with science diplomacy coming to a mature level, there are so many opportunities. It was described before, starting from, say, 2010, when the Royal Society and the AAAS started that benchmarking document. And of course, today, even in the European Union, the framework, which is very instructive. And there are so many opportunities, like the recent global ministerial science diplomacy meeting convened by UNESCO. And now our own forum today is a very good start. And it could start in the country and it can be beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, speaking from experience. Jan, what?
Yeah, no, I can only echo this. I never participated into any kind of science diplomacy training myself. It was everything training on the job. I think the most important thing is to have a keen interest
Right.
into what is happening at the geopolitical stage and into what is happening in science and technology. That's to start with. Of course, there are some kind of skills you can train and where you have training courses like communication skills and this sort of things. But the key issue is really to have an interest into, this interrelationship between science and diplomacy. And I can tell you, as it is a very novel and very developing field, actually, you see many young people going into it because some of the older scientists, they are perhaps not so keen to go into it. They may even have worries that, the diplomacy may contaminate their independence or whatever it may be. And I see, especially in the developing world, actually science diplomacy being run by young people and young academics. And I think there's a huge opportunity there, especially for young people.
Thank you. David?
Maybe also to add that it could be from both sides. On one hand, the person can become a diplomat. There are, certain requirements and competitions in each country. And after becoming a diplomat, the interest can be in a certain field related to science and technologies. But on the other hand, as Professor Zachary and Jan Marco mentioned, is from academic field. So combining both worlds, but also as it was said, that currently there are more and more different trainings offered in different institutions, even courses or programs which I believe in the near future will be really helpful to overcome this gap of between two worlds, and we will have really not only by work trained but professionally trained science and technology diplomats.
Thank you so much. And Emmy, if you would like to bring it all together in 1 or 2 sentences.
I'm not a diplomat and I'm not a scientist, but I still consider myself engaged in science diplomacy. So there are many options for you to be engaged. For example, if you work at the science agency or science ministry in your country and contribute to international collaboration, this is definitely science and technology diplomacy, right? So I guess my advice is that you have your options open to many careers for you to pursue, and this will eventually lead you to be active, to being active in science and technology diplomacy.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for all of our panelists for these wonderful contributions and inputs and advice on how to inspire more Asia-Europe collaboration. From our side, we can say that we remain dedicated to foster dialogue and welcome any initiative virtually and not virtually to keep this going between Asia and Europe and create these spaces where safe dialogue could be conducted, not only among scientists and diplomats, but young aspiring leaders who might end up in this working in this field. So thank you so much. So a virtual big round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. And we go to the closing of this session today. On the next slide, you can see the link to the report again, which has been uploaded to the website. It will be complemented by the country reports soon, beginning of next week, but the comparative part is already available. And as I said, we remain committed to foster dialogue and work with young people, emerging young leaders in this field. Please stay in touch with us and look out for these opportunities. You can sign up for our mailing list here. And I'm also happy to share that we are running a workshop series on focusing on Malaysia. So based on the findings of the comparative report, we engage a couple of countries to take a deeper look to see how science and technology ecosystems are working. So this year, we'll be working with colleagues from Malaysia, Thailand, and Kazakhstan, and Indonesia to deliver these workshops to you. So if you're interested in learning more about Asian countries and their ecosystems, you're most welcome to join us for those workshop series as well. So our time is up for today, unfortunately. But we invite you to keep these discussions going and look into the report findings and think about the why is this gap, why is there opportunity, and how to go about them. Thank you so much for joining us, and wish you a great day ahead or a great evening if you're in Asia. Thank you. Goodbye.